I went on a 5-day solo camping trip in a lesser-known national forest in southeast Utah. I'd been camping for years and spent a lot of time outdoors, so being alone like this wasn't new to me. Even though I hadn't been to this exact spot before, I'd explored nearby areas plenty of times, so I felt comfortable going in. The first 3 days were completely normal, quiet, peaceful, almost too quiet. No one else showed up the entire time. I spent my days just relaxing around the campsite, reading, cooking simple meals, and taking slow walks through the trees. It was exactly the kind of solitude I was looking for. On the third night, everything changed. I had a small campfire going, nothing big. Just enough to keep me warm, and I was lying back, trying to enjoy the stars. The sky was perfectly clear, the kind where you can see everything. And then, out of nowhere, the silence broke. It was a scream. A man screaming at the top of his lungs, somewhere out in the distance. The sound hit me instantly, sending a cold chill through my whole body. I froze without even realizing it, my heart suddenly pounding. After a second, I slowly stood up and turned toward the direction it came from. But it was way too dark to see anything beyond the reach of the feral IGHT. It sounded far away, but not far enough to feel safe. Maybe half a mile out, somewhere deeper in the forest, roughly in the direction where I knew there was a small lake. And then, nothing, just that one scream. The forest went completely silent again, like it had never happened. Before going to sleep that night, I tried to make sense of it. I told myself it had to be a mountain lion. If you've never heard one before, they can make these incredibly disturbing, almost human-like screams. Not exactly the same, but close enough that, if you're not paying attention, you could easily mistake it. So that's what I told myself, even though, deep down, I knew it didn't sound quite right. Honestly, I think I was just trying to calm myself down, trying not to let my thoughts spiral. Eventually, I managed to fall asleep, and somehow, I made it through the rest of the night without anything else happening. The next morning, everything felt normal again. I stayed around the campsite for a bit, but curiosity kept creeping in. By then, I'd mostly convinced myself there wasn't any real danger, so I decided to walk over to the lake. I thought maybe I'd find something, tracks, paw prints, anything that could explain what I heard. But what I found didn't make me feel better. Almost as soon as I reached the lake, I noticed something was off on the opposite side. The sand looked disturbed, not randomly, but in a way that felt intentional. I walked around to get a closer look. Scattered across the sand was a bunch of random stuff bags, food wrappers, bits of trash, things that clearly didn't belong out there. But what really stood out was how it was arranged. It wasn't just thrown everywhere. It formed a loose line, following a shallow groove carved into the sand, like something had been dragged. The trail of disturbed sand stretched in a straight path, and it ended right at the water's edge. I stood there for a moment, staring out across the lake. The surface was completely still. No ripples, no movement, just flat, dark water reflecting the sky. There was nothing to see, but the feeling it gave me was heavy, uneasy. I didn't stay long. I turned around and walked back to my campsite, a little faster than before, constantly glancing over my shoulder. Something about that place didn't sit right with me anymore. Once I got back to my tent, I felt a bit safer, or at least, safer than I had out there. I didn't really know what to make of what I'd just seen, but I made a decision not to overthink it. Letting my mind run wild would only make things worse. So I distracted myself. I made lunch, kept busy, tried to focus on anything else. As night started to fall, I refueled the campfire and settled in beside it. For a while, everything seemed fine again. The crackling fire, the darkness beyond it. It all felt manageable. But about an hour into the night, I realized I'd made a mistake. I hadn't gathered enough firewood, not wanting the fire to die out. I got up and started walking round the edge of my campsite, picking up small, dry sticks from the ground. I didn't go far, just within the outer edge of the FIRELIGHT, and that's when I heard it. A voice, a quiet whisper, coming from somewhere out in the darkness. Ahead of me, I froze. I didn't have my flashlight with me, and beyond the glow of the fire, it was completely pitch black. The voice was soft and quick for me to understand what was said, or even pinpoint exactly where it came from. It didn't feel like it was directed at me, though. It sounded separate, like someone speaking under their breath. A wave of fear hit me instantly, and I ran straight back to the campfire. I stood there for a while, trying to calm myself down, forcing my mind to come up with explanations. Maybe it was the wind, maybe the trees, maybe I just imagined it. But when I thought back to the scream from the night before, those excuses didn't hold up anymore at that point. I couldn't ignore it. Someone was out there watching. I stayed close to the fire for the next hour, just thinking, trying to figure out what to do. Realistically, I only had two options: stay where I was and hope whoever was out there left me alone, or pack up and leave in the middle of the night. But leaving in the dark felt even more dangerous. If someone really was out there with bad intentions, stepping away from the light and walking into the forest would only make me more vulnerable. So I stayed. The problem was, I still didn't have enough firewood. The flames were starting to shrink, and I knew I couldn't let the fire go out. So reluctantly, I got up again and walked to the edge of the light, reaching down to gather more sticks. This time, I managed to collect a bit more, maybe enough to last another hour, and then I heard it again, that same whispering voice. But this time, I was ready. I had my flashlight with me, and I immediately turned and shined it toward the sound. It barely helped. The beam didn't reach very far, and it didn't light up the area the way I expected. It just swallowed into the darkness after a short distance. After a few seconds, fear took over again, and I backed away quickly, heading straight for the safety of the fire. I threw the sticks into the flames and made sure it stayed strong. But at this point, my nerves were shot. I was genuinely scared for my life. Everything started connecting in my head: the scream, the strange trail by the lake, the scattered items, and now the voices just beyond the edge of my campsite. I was exhausted, but I didn't let myself rest, not even for a second. Every hour, I forced myself to get up and gather more wood to keep the fire alive. And almost every time I stepped away from the light, I heard them again. Voices, not just one, three, maybe for different voices, whispering back and forth. Quiet, low, almost like they were communicating with each other, reacting to what I was doing. It was deeply unsettling. It felt like they were aware of me, tracking me, waiting. But then, during the last couple of hours before sunrise, it stopped. When I went out again, there was nothing, no whispers, no movement, just silence. As soon as the sun came up and the light spread through the trees, I didn't waste any time. I packed everything as quickly as I could and started heading down the trail. The path led in the same general direction as where I'd been hearing the voices the night before, so I stayed on high alert the entire way out. At one point, I noticed several scattered footprints in the dirt. I stopped and looked at them for a moment, but there was no way to know who they belonged to. They could have been from the voices I heard, or from the person who screamed, or even just hikers who passed through days earlier. There was no way to tell. I eventually made it out of the forest safely, but to this day, I still don't have any real answers for what happened out there. I never saw anything in the news. No reports of missing people. No stories that connected back to what I experienced. Just that night, those sounds, and the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. This happened about a year ago, during my first time camping somewhere that wasn't a designated campground. Even though it was technically my first time doing that kind of trip, I still considered myself a fairly experienced camper. I knew the basics, I had all the gear, and I did everything you'd expect any regular camper to do. The only real difference before this was that I never had to hike out to a spot, and there were usually a lot more people around. I'd seen people set up these really elaborate campsites before, lanterns, full setups, but I always preferred to keep things simple and minimal. Still, at some point, I got the urge to try something different. I wanted to camp somewhere more isolated, somewhere quiet, away from crowds, where I could actually experience nature without distractions. The trail I picked was about a 2-hour hike. There weren't many photos or reviews online, but from what I could find, it seemed decent enough. I started the hike a few hours after sunrise. When I arrived, I noticed the parking area was completely empty. Calling it a parking lot would be generous. It was really just a small dirt clearing off the side of the road at first. Everything felt normal. The hike started off like any other, peaceful, steady, just me walking deeper into the woods. But about 30 minutes in, I spotted someone ahead of me on the trail. A man moving slowly through the trees. He was pretty far ahead at first, but within a minute or two, I had almost caught up to him. That's when I noticed something strange. He was walking incredibly slow, and I don't mean casually slow, I mean unnaturally slow. Almost like he was doing it on purpose. I'm not saying that to be rude, it just stood out immediately. Normally, I wouldn't pass someone on a trail like that. I'd just slow down, maybe take a break, and let them keep their distance ahead of me. But this guy was moving so slowly that I didn't really have a choice, so I went to pass him. As I walked up beside him, I gave a casual hey, just to be polite. But the second I got next to him, he suddenly sped up, walking at a completely normal pace, matching my speed exactly. That caught me off guard. Then he turned to me and started making conversation, asking how my day was going like nothing was unusual. I glanced over at him, a little confused by how quickly things had shifted. And then, without hesitation, he reached out his hand for a handshake and introduced himself as Oscar. I shook his hand, and just like that, we started talking. I wasn't against having a conversation, it's normal to run into people on trails, but something about how it started didn't sit right with me. It just felt off. Still, as we kept walking and talking, Oscar came across as a pretty normal, easygoing guy. We ended up talking for about 30 minutes. At one point, I noticed he didn't have a backpack, which seemed odd, so I asked him about it. He told me he had already set up his campsite and was just out for a walk. He said his camp was a little further into the trees, past the main camping area where I was heading. Eventually, I mentioned that I was still kind of new to this type of camping. He told me he'd been to this place many times and said it was a great spot for beginners. Then he casually invited me to come by his campsite later that evening, said we could sit around his fire and have dinner. At the time, it didn't seem like a bad idea. I agreed, thinking it might actually be nice to meet someone and maybe even make a new camping friend. When I reached the campground, I started setting up my gear while Oscar continued walking off into the trees toward his campsite. I couldn't see exactly where he went, but I assumed it wasn't too far from where I was. The next 5 or 6 hours were completely quiet. I was alone the entire time. No sign of Oscar, no other hikers, no other campers, just me and the forest. It was peaceful, but also a little too empty. It wasn't until the sun started setting that Oscar finally reappeared, walking out from the trees and back toward my campsite. He asked how everything was going, and we talked for a few minutes like. Before then, he reminded me about the invitation. He asked if I wanted to come hang out at his campfire and eat something. I said yes and followed him as we walked away from my tent and into the woods. I couldn't ignore the small feeling in the back of my mind telling me this might not be the smartest idea. I had just met this guy a few hours ago, and now I was following him deeper into the forest. But at the same time, I felt like I would have noticed if something was seriously off about him, aside from the strange, slow-walking thing earlier. He seemed completely normal. I followed him for about 5 minutes, going much deeper into the trees than I expected. The forest grew darker and quieter with each step. Eventually, I saw the faint orange glow of a campfire flickering through the trees ahead. We walked up to it, and immediately, something felt wrong. Oscar wasn't alone. There were 2 other men sitting around. The fire, he hadn't mentioned them at all, not once. And while I hadn't specifically asked if anyone else was there, it felt strange that he never brought it up, especially after inviting me over. It put me on edge instantly, but at that point, I was already deep in the woods with them. Leaving right away or questioning it would have made things awkward, maybe even worse. So I stayed. I sat down with them. They greeted me casually enough, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. Just basic small talk, nothing out of the ordinary. They were cooking something simple, just packets of ramen, boiling water over the fire. But after a little while, the conversation faded. Things got quiet. Oscar focused on the fire, poking at it while the water heated. The other 2 men just sat there. The forest around us had gone completely still and dark, like everything had settled into silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every time I looked up at them, their eyes would shift away from me, like they'd been watching, and I caught them. That's when I decided I needed to leave. I tried to keep it casual. Hey, I'm going to head back to my camp real quick and grab something from my bag, I said. Save me a bowl, I'll be right back. I made it sound as normal as possible, like I had every intention of returning. Oscar didn't even look up. He just kept tending to the fire, like he hadn't heard me at all. The other 2 men didn't say anything either. They just stared at me. The silence stretched for a few long, uncomfortable seconds. It felt heavy, tense. Then I slowly stood up, turned around, and started walking away. I had only taken a few steps when I heard movement behind me. I glanced back over my shoulder. The 2 men were now standing, just standing there, watching me dot. Oscar still hadn't moved. I didn't look for long. I turned back around and kept walking as I moved farther away. That feeling crept in, the kind of deep, sinking dread that makes your chest tighten. I could feel it behind me, like something was wrong, like I wasn't safe. I wanted to turn around again, but I was scared too. After putting some distance between us, I finally couldn't take it anymore. I turned back. I was far enough away that I couldn't see details anymore, but the glow of the fire was still visible through the trees. I could make out the logs we'd been sitting on, but the men were gone. All three of them gone. I didn't stop to think. I ran. I sprinted as fast as I could back toward the main campground where my tent was set up. When I got there, I immediately started tearing everything down. But the fear, the paranoia of not knowing where those men had gone, of thinking they could be anywhere in the dark, watching, waiting, it was too much. I abandoned everything and I ran. I followed the trail out without stopping, pushing myself the entire way until I finally reached my car. Once I got inside and started driving away, I called the police. I didn't have any solid proof that those men were planning something, but everything about that situation felt wrong. I needed someone to at least check it out. The officers came out to the trail. They didn't go all the way in to the campsite, but they did check the area near the trailhead, and what they told me made it even more unsettling. There were no other cars parked anywhere. Those men hadn't driven there, and there was no way to know how long they'd been out there, or how they even got there in the first place. I can't say for certain what their intentions were, but when I think back on everything, the way Oscar acted, the hidden campsite, the two men he never mentioned, the silence, the way they watched me, to me, it feels clear. Something really bad was going to happen that night, and I got out just in time. This happened sometime around 2015. Back then, I had a young, incredibly energetic retriever mix named Sammy. She was full of life, always running, always curious, and we went on tons of camping trips and road adventures together. She was the kind of dog that made every trip better just by being there. This particular trip wasn't anything big or special. It was just a quick getaway to a forest about an hour from home, to a campsite I had visited many times before. It was kind of my comfort spot, a place where me and Sammy could go to unwind, be alone, and relax without needing to plan too much or drive very far. We left early in the morning and arrived at the campsite. Around 2 p.m., everything started off normally. I set up camp, got things organized, and was ready to settle in. But almost immediately after we got there, I noticed something was off with Sammy. She wasn't acting like herself. Normally, when we arrived at this spot, she would be excited, running around, exploring, full of energy. But this time, she seemed tense, almost anxious. Her posture was stiff, and she kept looking around like she was sensing something nearby that I couldn't see. I stopped for a moment and scanned the area, trying to figure out what she might be reacting to. But there was nothing. The forest was completely still, quiet, almost unnaturally quiet. About 30 minutes passed like that before she finally seemed to relax a bit. Slowly, she returned to her usual self, fronting around, playing with sticks, enjoying the space like she always did. One thing about Sammy, though, is that she had always been extremely protective. So I told myself she probably caught a scent, or heard something in the distance. Maybe another animal and just went into alert mode for a while. I didn't think too much of it after that. I made some food for us, and we spent the next few hours just hanging around the campsite. Sammy wandered around, exploring, occasionally bringing me sticks, while I worked on building a fire and just took it easy. As the sun started to dip lower in the sky, I gathered more firewood and built the fire up a bit stronger so it would light up the area as it got darker. Everything felt calm again. Quiet, peaceful. Sammy was lying right beside me, and we were both just staring into the fire when I heard something. A sound, coming from somewhere ahead of us. I looked up, squinting into the dim light, and I thought I saw something move near the trees. And then, instantly, everything changed. Sammy jumped up and completely lost control. She bolted straight toward whatever was out there, barking loudly and growling in a way I had never heard from her before. It wasn't playful, it was aggressive, intense. I shot up to my feet and yelled for her to come back, but she didn't even hesitate. She was locked onto something, and she was going after it. I took off running after her. The sun hadn't fully set yet, but the shadows had taken over the forest, making it incredibly hard to see clearly or move quickly. Within just a few seconds, I could barely see her anymore, and after about 30 seconds, her barking started to fade. Within a minute, she was gone, just like that. I didn't even have time to process what had happened. I had no idea what I saw, whether it was a person, an animal, or something else entirely, but I kept running in the direction she went. I was hoping she'd lose interest in whatever she was chasing and come back to me. I knew she was smart and could probably find her way back using my scent. But at the same time, I was terrified of the opposite, that she might actually catch up to something she couldn't handle. And as the minutes passed, that fear only grew stronger. The forest got darker, quieter, heavier at that point. The sun had almost completely set, and I realized I had made a mistake. I had run off without grabbing anything, no flashlight, no gear, nothing. I had to make a difficult decision. As much as I wanted to keep searching, I knew I risked getting lost myself if I kept going blindly into the dark. So I turned back toward the campsite, planning to grab a flashlight and search properly. I truly hoped, Sammy would just find her way back on her own, but I couldn't just sit there and wait, not knowing if she was hurt or in danger. Once I got back, I grabbed a light and headed out again, retracing my steps into the forest. I called her name over and over, my voice echoing through the trees, but there was nothing. No barking, no movement, not even a sound. I'd searched for over an hour. I didn't go too far from camp, maybe within a mile, staying in an area I knew well enough to avoid getting lost. Still, the silence was overwhelming. Then, suddenly, my flashlight caught something, a small reflection on the ground. I walked closer, and my stomach dropped. It was Sammy's dog tag, lying in the grass. Her collar tag, just sitting there. It looked like it had been torn right off her in that moment. My mind immediately went to the worst possible place. My heart started racing as panic set in. But then, just seconds later, moved my light around the area, and I saw her. Sammy was lying near a tree, not far from where the tag was. She was alive. She wasn't injured, at least not visibly, but she was shaking, terrified, completely frozen. She wouldn't even stand up. I rushed over to her, dropped down beside her, and tried to calm her, but she wouldn't move at all. I ended up picking her up and carrying her for about a quarter of a mile before she was even willing to walk on her own. Again, something had happened out There's something that scared her so badly she just shut down, and I didn't want to find out what it was. At that point, I made up my mind. As soon as we got back to camp, I was packing everything up and leaving immediately, even if it meant driving out in the middle of the night. Sammy stayed close beside me as we made our way back through the dark. She didn't wander, didn't run ahead. She stayed right next to me the entire time. Eventually, through the trees, I could see the faint glow of the campfire. But as we got closer, something felt wrong, very wrong. When we finally reached the campsite, my heart dropped. It had been completely ransacked. My tent was torn apart, ripped open like something had violently shredded it. My backpack had been dumped out, and all my belongings were scattered across the ground. I quickly scanned the area with my flashlight. Nothing, no movement, no sound. Just destruction. I didn't waste any time. I rushed around, grabbing whatever I could find and shoving it back into my bag. I probably only managed to collect about half of my things before I noticed Sammy again. She had stopped, and she was staring into the trees, locked onto something in the darkness. Her body stiff, her eyes fixed. I didn't question it. I dropped whatever I was doing and grabbed my bag. We left immediately. The walk back to the truck took a little over an hour. The entire way, Sammy stayed close beside me, quiet, tense, and completely unlike her usual self. I don't think we were followed, but honestly, with how hidden everything felt out there, I can't say that for sure. We made it back to the truck and drove home after that night. I avoided that campsite completely. Sammy started to recover after a few days. What's strange is she wasn't injured at all, no cuts, no wounds, nothing physical to explain what had happened, but her collar had been ripped off, and I still can't explain how. Like I said, this happened back in 2015. Sammy passed away a couple of years ago, and after she was gone, I found myself thinking about that night again. Part of me wanted answers, or maybe just closure, so I went back, but nothing happened. I didn't find anything, no signs, no clues, nothing that could explain what we experienced out there to this day. I still don't know what happened that night, and I have a feeling I never will.